Construction on a new development begins. For some, it means opportunity. For others, it means more traffic, more pressure on roads, schools, and services. For builders, it's a different challenge. Rising costs, complex approvals, and uncertainty that can stall projects before they even begin. Add in growing pressure from the province to build more homes faster, and you've got an incredible challenge that affects nearly everyone. So how do you grow a city without losing what people love about it? That's the balance Maple Ridge is working hard to get right. Growth has to be aligned with infrastructure, services, community needs, and long-term livability. The city doesn't build housing, so developers must be supported to build in a challenging market. And that's where strategy matters. So let's get into it. You're listening to the Real Ridge podcast, where we share the stories behind the headlines on topics that are shaping Maple Ridge. I'm Mayor Dan Ruimy, and today we're spotlighting how the city of Maple Ridge is tackling one of the biggest challenges facing communities across British Columbia: housing. From streamlining approvals to planning complete neighborhoods, this is about more than building homes. It's about building a community for all. Joining us to talk about shaping the future of our community is James Stiver, Director of Planning and Building at the City of Maple Ridge. Welcome, James.
Thank you, Mayor Ruimy. I'm happy to be here. Thanks for inviting me in.
Before we dive into the nitty-gritty on housing, tell us a little bit about yourself.
I have been the Director of Planning and Building here at the city for just under 2 years now. I have a background of over 30 years in planning and economic development in the public sector, in the private sector, and I've spent time at different municipalities in Ontario and in BC. And I'm really excited to be a part of what we're doing here in the city.
Excellent. So you've been doing this for quite some time, and you consider yourself an expert in this?
By default, I am an expert. I don't like to oversell myself, but I have seen and done a lot of things over time, and there is an expertise that comes with that kind of experience.
Okay, because Maple Ridge is one of the region's fastest growing communities. Population increased by 11% in 5 years. We're sitting at about 106 population right now and expected to increase to about 150 by 2040. When I tell you those stat numbers, what's the first thing that comes to mind since you're a building and planning guy?
Planning inherently is a long-range focused kind of profession where we look at what's expected and try and manage change over that kind of time and building the infrastructure needed to support that. Projected growth in this region has gone up and down over the years, and it's primarily driven by immigration. And we've seen some significant changes at the federal level over the last couple of years that have changed that outlook. But BC and particularly the Lower Mainland has seen some significant growth pressures, and Maple Ridge is a big part of that. And the challenges that come with that involve making sure that the community still has the pieces that make it desirable and livable, but also support that growth through hard infrastructure like water and sewer and roads to keep it all livable over that growth horizon.
Does the city build housing?
No, and you mentioned this off the top, that the city doesn't actively build housing, but the city has an important role to play in managing where and how and what gets built in the city and setting the stage for the developers and builders to come in and deliver on those key pieces of the community. So the partnership with the building community is essential in that.
So I know when we talk about housing, people talk about affordable housing. There's a wide spectrum of housing that's needed in any community. When we look at housing in Maple Ridge, how do you break that down? What do you think our needs are overall?
Yeah, growth in the city is coming whether we plan for it or not. So the important piece is the work that we do here, that council does with your leadership, is around managing the growth that's coming to build a community for everyone. And the challenge comes around what does that look like? Not everybody needs the same kind of housing or wants the same kind of housing. There's a number of studies that are underway and have been recently completed, including the city's housing needs report, the city's housing action plan, that get to the heart of what kind of housing and amenities are needed for the people that are here today, but may not even be born yet. This is a 20 and 30-year plan. So what does the community look like for those people that don't have a voice or the ability to express their needs today. So these kind of strategies show that we have a fairly young community here, and historically a lot of young families have moved out this way in search of housing and amenities. But Maple Ridge is also aging quicker than the regional average, which a lot of people don't appreciate. So what does a city look like with an increasing number of seniors, and what are their needs for housing? Things like accessibility and affordability come into play. So it's looking to balance the needs across those kind of demographics and income sectors in the community so that we don't provide all one type of housing. It's about providing choice. It's not just excluding or including only one type. It's about that broader choice to meet the needs of a diverse community.
So earlier I said that the city doesn't build housing. We don't own those lands that people want to build on. A developer or somebody buys a plot of land. Then how do we control what goes on into those areas? Because you said, there's so many different needs in our community. Accessibility for seniors, larger properties for families. So if we're not building those things, do we dictate to developers like, hey, I want you to build this for me? Like, how does that work?
The city has a big role in that kind of guidance through tools like the official community plan, which is a long-range roadmap of where the city wants to head over that horizon. The work that council does and staff supports defines what the community wants to be, where do we want to go, and the roadmap is the official community plan. It's important to have that plan to understand where growth should and shouldn't happen in the community. So that, I don't like to use the word control, but that is the guide because it sets out where those environmentally sensitive areas are that we want to protect. Things like the ALR, there's an urban boundary that sets a hard stop to where urban types of development occur. And more recently, we've committed to focusing growth in the town center area and the Lougheed corridor, where we know that there's major investments in transit coming and infrastructure can best support that growth. So it's really that kind of guidance role that the city plays. Any kind of development approvals have to come through staff, then to council. So the lens that we always apply is this consistent with the roadmap that the city has set out? And then there's the other pieces that come into play like zoning and development permits that lock down the greater details of that type of development.
When I first got elected, I met with a bunch of developers and I met with a whole bunch of folks from the public. And, inevitably you hear, and I've been hearing this from other communities, well, it takes such a long time to get a permit in Maple Ridge. It's expensive to get a development permit in Maple Ridge. The city holds you back. The city has requirements that they want you to do. There's a lot of stuff in there. So let's try to break that down and start off with when it comes to the building code. Is this a Maple Ridge issue or is this a provincial issue?
Great question. So much of what the city does is dictated by the province. So you mentioned the building code. That is a provincial document, and the city and primarily staff are the administrators of that document. As we review and issue permits, we have to ensure that those standards are upheld. And they're in place for an important reason. They're meant to protect the safety of the occupants of a building, but also the neighbors from future problems that may come about from construction practices. It also protects property values and things like that. So the building code is an important piece, but as you rightly point out, that's not the city's doing. We are an administrator of that. The listeners may have heard about major changes in housing legislation that the province has brought through, and we've been playing catch up for the last 3 years on that to implement those changes here in the city's context. Those have been a major shift in how housing is reviewed and approved and delivered in communities across the province, not dictated by Maple Ridge. So we're doing our best to implement that in this context that we find ourselves. It's important to partner with the province as these new things are created and rolled out because they have a major role in the delivery of such important pieces of infrastructure such as healthcare and schools and all those elements that make a complete community. So it is challenging for us to navigate all that. And some of the rules that we have here in Maple Ridge are indeed made up by city council. There's standards that have been set because this is what the community has said they want. Maple Ridge is a complex environment to build in, and every community is a little different, but we have such a beautiful setting here with the mountains and the rivers and the natural areas, but this creates a very complex environment to build in. So, water table flooding issues, natural spaces we're trying to protect, agricultural land reserve. These are all complexities that add time to reviews and can be seen as frustrations for developers, but the reward of developing in this community is high because it's such a beautiful and desirable place.
So I know, again, when we first got in, historically, we haven't been the fastest at delivering permits. We were still stuck in the days of paper and pens and walk into someone's office and you have stacks that are a mile high, maybe not a mile high, but and when you wanted to get information, I just wasn't able to get that information. It could take 4 or 5 weeks for me to get an answer to a question. What has changed?
Well, we are going through a historical transformation here at the city right now, and we've had the benefit of having some funding that has helped support what we're calling the Development Service Optimization Project, or DSO, as we often refer to it. That has led to significant changes in the digitization of permitting and approvals processes. It's still a work in progress, but it has been a game changer here at the city, and we're very pleased with how it's changed the way that we do business. We now have processes that we've updated to align with those digital permitting changes, including simultaneous reviews by staff instead of sequential. The online applications portal that has been set up to facilitate digital permitting has reduced permitting review times in a significant way. Right now, it's standing at about 73% reduction in timelines. And it's because we don't need these mile-high stacks of paper anymore and walking back and forth with pieces of paper that need review and signature. We're using the technology to our best advantage. We also have other programs that we have brought out to support and complement our digitization, including the Certified Professional Program, which is professional reliance on architects and engineers in the building permitting process. We have recently launched the Velocity Concierge program, which is more of a development approvals planning focus that helps support those complex applications that have different issues by different professionals that can have a significant positive impact on the community. So the concierge that has recently come on board is tasked with supporting those projects and moving them through the system in a way that benefits the community. And we've also created new tools for developers and designers, including the Housing Design Catalog and many different policy and procedure updates to give more tools to designers to encourage infill housing in different areas of the city and give better choice for future residents of the community.
So earlier we talked about the town center, the low heat transit corridor. This is, from council's perspective, is trying to densify the downtown core. Why are we trying to do that? What is the point of densifying the downtown core?
It's a big change for Maple Ridge, and it's getting a lot of attention. Putting growth in the right place is such an important philosophy. Extension of water and sewer and roads as a city expands outwards is very expensive, not just to build, but to maintain. So when you have existing infrastructure, like in the town center and the low heat corridor, we need to take the best advantage of that as we can before thinking about that outward expansion. It's a more cost-effective way to build a community, but it also creates neighborhoods that are walkable, so you don't have to drive everywhere to go to the corner store, to take your kids to school or what have you, but also creates critical mass that supports new businesses coming into the community, new services and amenities. And not everybody has access to a car. Cars are very expensive. And we know that the two greatest household costs for anybody in this region and other areas across North America are housing and transportation. And our colleagues at Metro Vancouver did a study not that long ago that demonstrated quite clearly that people in search of more affordable housing moving out of the core of the region into the more suburban areas, such as Maple Ridge, are trading off housing costs for transportation costs. So people driving everywhere drive up those costs, but they're often hidden because the housing affordability is such a prominent issue for them. So if we can locate people in areas where perhaps they don't have to drive as much. I'm not saying it's possible to get rid of driving everywhere, but that benefits people financially. It leads to healthier lifestyles. It leads to more equitable communities because not everybody can drive, not that they are forced to choose to drive. And also they're healthier lifestyles because people can move around. And of course, we mentioned earlier about the bus rapid transit coming on Lougheed. That's a major investment, not just for TransLink, but a huge change in this community around rapid transit and connectivity to the rest of the region. Good planning practice is to take advantage of transit investment by encouraging more people to live there, more businesses to locate in those key transit areas. Again, to reduce driving, to take best advantage of the infrastructure that's there and build a community around that's connected and equitable.
With one of our key goals when we first got in was the bus rapid transit. And I just take a moment and speak to that. We're not taking lanes away from Lougheed Highway. We're actually adding 2 lanes. They will be dedicated bus lanes going from Haney to Langley. That's the first one. What we saw in other communities in the States and in Europe was 2 years after the BRT was installed, you started to see businesses popping up along the route. And why I bring that up is because it's so important. We also often hear the lack of shopping. It's all tied together. Again, we don't build commercial enterprises, but if somebody wants to come to Maple Ridge to open up a business and sell their wares, they want to know with some certainty that there's enough customers to support them. And by densifying that downtown core, you're trying to create the environment where you'll have more density, which means more people, which would attract more businesses to Maple Ridge. That's what I see as so important with the BRT. But that's a big project. What can you tell us about where we are on that?
Absolutely. It's a huge project for the city. Right now, TransLink is busy working on the design for the corridor on Lougheed running through the heart of the city. And you're correct. The plan is to add 2 dedicated bus lanes, but also to preserve the 2 lanes each way of vehicle traffic. It is a provincial highway, so the city is working closely with TransLink and with the Ministry of Transportation and Transit to ensure that it still serves its role as a major corridor in the region for goods movement, for commuters, while adding 2 additional bus lanes. So as you can appreciate, the roadway will have to widen, and we've been working with the landowners along that stretch to try and figure out how best to make that happen. But it's quite exciting that this piece of infrastructure is being planned, and I am excited that this is the first one in the region to roll out. But I also understand the funding hasn't been fully committed to yet, but the design will be completed in the next year or so, and that is a major step forward. But you're absolutely right. The city has an overabundance of residential land, which has impacts on the tax burden that they have to bear across the city. So the provision of commercial and industrial opportunities in the community will benefit residents by giving them places to shop and do business. But also we're hoping give them opportunities to work closer to home so that maybe they don't have to commute as far. People can live and work closer to home. And of course, there's all sorts of positive tax implications to having businesses in the community that help take some of the burden off of the residential taxpayer. But again, it also gives options to allow people to walk to a shop rather than have to get in a car and drive to a different community for it. So the BRT will have all sorts of positive impacts on how we do planning in that Lougheed and town center area. And I'm quite excited to see that roll out over the next few years.
And do we have any development up and coming along that transit corridor?
Yeah, it is a really tough time right now for residential developers. It's not a surprise, I'm sure, to most people listening. But we are busy here at the city. There's a lot of interest in certain types of development. The city is not impacted as much as some of the other communities in the region around the high-rise condo market. That's not our space. But there's a lot of interest in setting up for the future infrastructure investments on the corridor. The significance is not lost on landowners and developers in the community. We're actively meeting with developers. There's a lot of interest along that corridor and applications that are in process. Right now, the city has 150 rezoning applications that are active in the city. And they're all over the place, not just in Lougheed in the town center. But we also have 450 active building permit applications that we're working on in different locations. So there's plenty of things that are occupying our time. But to your question, there's a lot of interest in this corridor and how it's changing over time. And I'm very excited that there's prospects that are going to introduce new businesses and housing options in that area as the planning is laid out.
So while the city doesn't build homes, we do try to build places where people can live, work, learn, and connect. And I think that's the long-term strategy of having a building and planning department. You were talking about the challenging development market that's out there right now. There's across the province, there's some developments that are challenged. They're likely not going to be able to build. So, in whatever scenarios that they find themselves in, they'll either have to sell or find a way to move forward. And sometimes people look at it and say, well, there's an empty lot there. Why isn't the city doing anything? There's derelict homes on that property. Why isn't the city doing anything about that? I know we're not building, but what are we doing about that? Because we do have quite a few of those properties that have been sitting for a long time. Some do have derelict properties on there. So it's not an easy process, I know. So maybe walk us through that.
It is challenging, and I can appreciate that it can be frustrating for people to see activity in certain areas and no activity in other areas. The city tries to be supportive and responsive to the development community and landowners, and we collaborate with local builders and landowners on projects. But people have private property rights, and that's sacrosanct, and people can choose what to do and not to do with their properties. The city has tools that it can use to manage change, and we talked about those a few moments ago around directing land uses over time into different categories and standards, but the city can't force anyone to build something. So that being said, there are bylaws in place and regulations in place that can deal with things like abandoned homes and derelict properties. And there is a standard of care that has to be maintained for properties. If they become dangerous or unhealthy, there are enforcement tools that can be used. But whether somebody redevelops a property or builds something is largely up to them to decide. And because it's a challenging market, land development is expensive. And sometimes property owners don't understand what they're getting into when they take on a redevelopment project. And we do hear from time to time how expensive and cumbersome the process can be. And I understand that. It's an expensive business, but there's a lot of potential for reward at the end of it. And that tends to be why you see the bigger developers doing the bigger scale of development, because they have the resources, but also recognize the reward that comes at the end of it. So, a partnership and collaboration is important. And as you mentioned, we don't build housing, so we need to collaborate on those that can build the type of community that the city would like to see and work together on achieving their objectives for what they want to get out of a property. They have to make a profit or they wouldn't do it. And at the same time, making the city a better place with every development that happens.
I look back to when I first got in and we started going through all of our files, and I'll call them legacy files. They've been there for a long time. In some cases, they've been in the system for up to 10 years. And those are difficult files that we are trying to get through, but put those off to the side. You mentioned about your digital service optimization, and you mentioned a 73% reduction. So typically, if I'm coming to you and I don't have a water course in my backyard and I don't have any complicated ALR situations or other environmental issues, typically, how long would it take me to get a permit?
I get this question a lot, and I'll give you the good bureaucratic answer. It depends. If we're talking about a single family home, it's a different discussion than if it's a 6-story apartment block. Site context means so much for how long permits take to be issued. Generally, we're working at about a 12-week turnaround for single family, which is a huge difference than where we were, say, even a year ago. And you mentioned these legacy files, and it's not to disparage older applications, but the challenge that comes with them is they were often submitted at a time where we had different regulations in place or different standards in place, and we are obligated to continue to process them. And we're doing so with previous bylaws and standards. And it creates a different approach to standard of care for the permit once it's issued. So the sooner we can move these legacy files through the system, the better. And I mentioned a minute ago about the 450 building permits that are underway. There's a lot of active permits that have just stalled out because property owner doesn't have the resources to continue, or their priorities have changed, or needs have changed, or what have you. The longer that these hang on, the more they are becoming a drain on resources at the city, and they're pulling the standards backwards in terms of what we're trying to deliver for the city. So we are actively trying to move these projects either forward or close them out. But back to the question about timing, the improvements will continue in terms of timing. And I know some municipalities promote very quick time turnaround, and some municipalities are using things like AI to support reviews and processing. We are exploring all sorts of options here in the city, including the use of AI and digital processes and standard responses to applications that are going to continue to reduce time. But this isn't development at any cost. This is doing the right kind of development to make the community a better place, and not just ramming through development because it's what is of the interest of a particular landowner. It's ensuring that it's safe. It adds to the sustainability and livability of the community. And that takes care and time. So we're never going to get it down to zero, but we recognize that building a community delivers positive benefits to Maple Ridge, and we don't want to be a barrier to delivering much needed housing in the community because it just holds people back from living their best lives and being a productive member of the community.
So earlier you were talking about, again, the market and the challenges that developers are facing. And one thing that keeps coming up, and it's the elephant in the room, is DCC charges. Maybe take a moment and explain what DCC charges are and what we're allowed to do, what we're not allowed to do.
This is another thing that's very prescribed by the province, not very discretionary, but DCCs, or development cost charges, are levied against new development to help pay for the infrastructure, water, sewer, roads, parks, that are needed to support new development. So it's not a means of catching up with old infrastructure or replacing old infrastructure the city has. It has to be growth related. And there's been a lot of talk lately about the cost of development charges and what that adds on to the value of a house, because developers want to recover costs so they get passed on to the purchaser. But the reality in this region is we have a lot of aging infrastructure that needs to be replaced, a lot of new infrastructure. And there's been a lot of attention in the media over sewage treatment plants that are regional, water treatment plants that are regional, and Maple Ridge has to pay its share of that, and growth has to pay for growth. And that's been the philosophy. If growth doesn't pay for growth, it's on the shoulders of the residential taxpayer to pick up that tab. It's a fine balance that municipalities have to maintain over how much gets transferred onto developers, or the cost of a new home, versus what is supported by taxpayers. So if you don't charge what you need to charge through a DCC, then you're delaying future infrastructure projects to the point where they could be more costly, or you may need some other intervention because of delayed response. It is a difficult line to walk, but it's inevitable that growth has to pay its share of these infrastructure costs.
So hypothetically, I'm building a 6-story building, and the city says, well, you're going to charge me DCCs, but on top of that, I got to make sure that I have sidewalks, I've got to have amenities, I've got to have green space, I've got to have a mix of 1, 2, and 3 bedroom. And they come and they say, well, why am I paying for that? That's the city that should pay for that. Let's talk about that, because there's such a misunderstanding that a developer doesn't want to pay to connect sewer, doesn't want to pay for perhaps sidewalks, whatever that might be. So what should they be responsible for? The building a 6-story building, 200 apartments, what comes with that?
I think you touched on the big points right there, that if a new building is coming into an established neighborhood, there's improvements that we ask for with that. And These may even be off the site, and it includes sidewalks. It could include a new traffic signal because the number of apartments that are coming in we anticipate are going to generate traffic impacts on the community. But the fundamental question that's often not asked by the people that complain about these costs is, if we don't pay for it, who pays for it? So these pieces are still needed to build the kind of community that the city wants to build. Somebody has to pay. And the direct impact of a development, we often refer to them as generating externalities, which means that you've created an impact because you have a new building that's coming in and you just want to plug and play on the water and sewer and the roads and everything's fine. They're already there, but you've created an impact there because that building wasn't there before, and it could have maybe been 4 single-family lots, and now it's 40 apartments. So there's an impact of people moving into these apartments now, flushing toilets and, driving on the roads and wanting to go access park space. If the developer doesn't pay, and inevitably the people that buy those units or rent those units don't pay, then who pays for that? Because there is a expansion need for all of these things. And the simple answer to that question is the taxpayers pay for that. So it comes around to a question of somebody that's been living in the community perhaps for years or decades, not changing anything on their property, just living their best life, all of a sudden now has to pay more taxes because an apartment building has gone in down the street. These questions of fairness come up through those kind of conversations. But look, land development is an expensive business, and often it can be incredibly costly. And I don't blame developers for wanting to minimize those costs, and creates a better bottom line. But those externalities have to be absorbed somewhere. And traditionally, municipalities have picked up that cost. So that's what we're trying to get to with development cost charges. But you also highlighted that through development permitting and council's consideration of these things, we recognize that there's an impact here, and your residents that are moving into this development will need to walk on a sidewalk, or they want to access park, or again, they'll be flushing toilets when they move in. So who picks up the costs of that? And it's a fundamental question that council has to wrestle with, but also recognize that there's impacts and value that comes from development.
So if I'm building that 6-story, 200 apartment unit, the amount of time it takes me to get a shovel in the ground and to finish that project, I'm paying the bank or my lenders holding costs and service charges and so on and so forth. If I'm stuck in the system for 5 years, that's going to have more of a detrimental impact on my overall bottom line than development cost charges.
Oh, yes. We hear this all the time. Time is money, a very common kind of refrain. And I completely believe it, that delays are very costly. You're right. They have carrying costs, and most developers have lenders that want to see progress and get their money back, and they're under those kind of pressures. So we're very optimistic that the DSO project will lead to better timelines. Look, staff don't want to be the holdup of these things. We recognize the value of them, and we recognize the cost of delays. So we don't want to delay them unnecessarily. But what we have found through our processing timelines that we've been tracking, and as this process rolls out, the digitization allows us to track timelines for our review and our processing. We're finding a significant amount of the time are delays by the applicant or the developer. And quite often, for those that may not appreciate, when an application comes in, a review is done by city staff from many different departments. Comments are passed back to a developer and say, these issues are fine, but these other things need more attention, and we will work collaboratively to resolve them. But when things are handed back to the applicant, often those delays are not accounted for in an applicant's frustrations with how long a process takes. So it goes back, and they have to address these issues, and then they come back to the city for another review.
Yeah, I think when somebody is calculating their time, the clock doesn't start with, here's a napkin of what I want to do. And in a lot of cases, that's the type of comment that we get back is, well, I've been in the system for X amount of years, but that first napkin didn't tell us anything. And by the time you actually get to your pre-application meeting, where you've got, now that we've combined first and second reading, where here's your proposal, a lot more detail than it was before. Here are the notes back, and you go back and forth until you both agree on, okay, yes, we agree that we are going to need to do A, B, C, D, E. To me, is that when the clock starts?
You mentioned a few moments ago about legacy files, and many of these legacy files were the kind of back of the napkin. Here's a concept. And the city's process used to be that these applications would come before council, and council would say, hey, that's a great idea. Why don't you go work on that? And these things are so preliminary in nature that when you get into actually designing a building or a site, the complexities can be overwhelming. And some of these legacy files have carried on so long because not enough thought was put into the initial application. And now you mentioned just now that combining first and second reading, which is kind of a bureaucratic thing. I won't get into that, but it creates more certainty over having a development plan that has been thought out, is economically feasible, meets the city's standards for development, and is reasonable for the site. That is a much different position to start from than I have this kind of box on a napkin that I'm thinking about, let's get going. So it's an oversimplification, but many of the legacy files are challenged with these kind of issues that not enough thought was put into it initially. And the standards of development, and the standards are getting stricter over time, I'll fully admit that, because we know more about environmental protection now and the kind of community we want to build. In earlier years, that kind of perspective was limited. And I like to think we're in a much better place because we know what kind of community we want to build and how we want it to grow, rather than just development for development's sake.
And I think as we move forward, again, for the public who may not understand those empty lots, there are times when you go through first, second, and third reading, and then you see that property being listed for sale because there's a perceived value attached to it. We have no control over that. If somebody wants to sell their land, that's totally up to them. If they want to sell their project, that is totally up to them. We just don't have any control over that. So we talked about a diversity of housing, the small scale multi-unit housing, which is mandated through the province. We need a spectrum of housing, of rental housing, family-friendly, adaptable housing, tenant protections, rental replacements. I mean, these are all things any community needs to make sure that they have a handle on it, or else you're going to build a community that does not meet the needs of the residents that are there. And you mentioned earlier, we're getting more seniors. We're an aging country. Our average age throughout the country is actually fairly high. So as we continue to build our community and we look at infrastructure such as housing, but beyond that, average age in Maple Ridge is 40 to 49. We've got a lot of young families. So we have to build rec centers. We have to build more arenas. We have to build more green spaces. But beyond that, and we talked about the BRT, is the road connections. And the one that we're actually working on right now is Abernathy. So maybe give us a quick update on that one.
Absolutely. There's only so many east-west links in the city, and it's not a surprise that traffic is a huge challenge in this community because of past decisions of where growth happened and the limited number of roadways and connections in and out of the community. Abernathy Way is a project that has been going on for a number of years. The next phase, phase 3, is underway right now. That will see the extension of a 4-lane roadway from 232 to 240, which is great news for the community. That next phase of Abernathy, or we're calling phase 4 from 240th East, will also support the new industrial area that the city has been advancing and came to council earlier this year to bring new industrial land online here in the city to create those local jobs we talked about a few moments ago and create industrial assessment that can support new businesses, expanding businesses in the community, support our trade-oriented region. There's a shortage of industrial land across the region. And I know in an earlier podcast, you talked extensively about those challenges and what Maple Ridge's role is in trying to address that. So we're quite excited that Abernathy is a key piece of infrastructure that has been missing and I know has been talked about for many years, that is now being advanced and will provide some of that relief for people that live up in the Silver Valley area, but also these future jobs that we're planning for.
Yeah, I actually just went to the grand opening of the North Shore Bike Park, not in North Vancouver, down by our industrial area. And it's a cool place. It didn't take long to get there. It's down by 256 area. But that to me shows me that people want to come here. There is a need for those industrial lands, and they're all connected. The more that you have housing, the more amenities you need to support those folks that are there. And I know that our capital plan for the next 5 years, we have about $432 million of infrastructure projects to make sure that we're aligned with our transportation network, tie that to the BRT. Maple Ridge is going to look very different in 2030. And it's something that they've been talking about for 30 years, but it's something that we are actually moving the dial forward on that. So I guess what is it that we're looking to get from them? We want to show them that we want to collaborate, especially in a market that's struggling right now. We want to show that we're not going to be a barrier, right? I mean, responsible development is always going to be key. But if you come to Maple Ridge, that you can expect good service, you can expect to move through the system, providing you're doing your share and making sure you're getting all your documents in on time and so on and so forth. I guess from my perspective, as an operations person all my life, I want to make sure that the city is being supportive, responsive, and solutions-oriented, which having completed or continuing to work on the digital services optimization, the CP program, the Concierge model. I think we're the first in BC to introduce that Concierge model, for those complex projects that you can move forward with. And I guess for me, we're not the same city that we were a decade ago or even 5 years ago. Yes, the province has come down and mandated targets for everybody. Great. But I like to think that we took that as an opportunity to reevaluate how we do business in Maple Ridge, how City Hall does business in Maple Ridge. And the fact that your role is building and planning shows we've amalgamated the two because it makes it a little bit easier to get your answers, to get everybody on the same page. So maybe just talk about the amalgamation. I know we're coming down to the end of our time here. Talk about why amalgamating the two was so important.
The services that are provided in planning and building are very similar, and they do overlap in many different ways. It's really kind of beginning to the end of the process where you start talking with a developer or an applicant about the vision for a project that might change the land use of a property, develop something. We go through the necessary reviews and approvals, make sure all the standards are met to deliver something that's good quality for the community. Then it's handed off to the building department where actual structural drawings are reviewed and permitted, and then inspections and occupancy. So it makes a lot of sense from a seamless continuum of process, but there's so much overlap between the work that happens in both departments that bringing them together highlighted the efficiencies that can be realized by bringing the processes together. And we talked a bit about this a few minutes back on the concurrent reviews of files versus sequential. And it's essential to kind of consider all the processes in both sides of the new department when we're developing this DSO project and what that can look like with the review and the support that has to happen. And, by all means, we're open to collaborating with the development community, making the system as painless as possible. But just to be clear that we still have objectives that we need to meet to build a better community. And it's not developer at any cost. It's building a community that the residents want and the future residents want. And it's engagement with them. And we do a ton of engagement with the public on that. And I just wanted to highlight that piece as well. So it's not just perceived as us doing everything we can to make it easier for developers. It's about achieving an outcome that's better for the community and the future residents of the community. And we take engagement with the public very seriously as well.
So if I'm a new developer and I'm interested in coming to Maple Ridge, what do I do?
Oh, give me a call. I'd be happy to chat with you. Absolutely. We have all sorts of opportunities to reach out to the city, to meet with us, to talk about the objectives. I'm always happy to talk about what we're trying to achieve here in Maple Ridge, how we can help you through a process. We have what's called a pre-application review process, or PAR, P-A-R, and that's all highlighted on the city's website. It allows somebody that has an interest in something to go through a process to identify what types of applications will be needed, what types of background studies, what the process could look like. And we can document that for a prospective developer. But if a developer is just interested in reaching out to the city to figure out what's possible, we have a very friendly and outgoing economic development group. Certainly my contact information is available on the website. I'm happy to chat with a prospective developer and let them know where we're headed as a community, or put them in touch with the right people.
James, I'm going to say this, like I said at the end of every podcast. I wish I had more time because we could go on and on and on, but I'm going to end it at just, housing isn't just a challenge. It's an opportunity. And the exciting part of that opportunity is helping us to build the future of Maple Ridge and doing it in the right way and understanding that we are going to continue to grow. So I want to thank you for taking time out of your busy day and sharing some of that information. We'll have to get you back, and there's so much more to dive in on. But thank you very much for being here today.
Yeah, and thanks so much. I always enjoy chats with you, Mayor Ruimy, and this topic is near and dear to my heart, and I would welcome an opportunity to come back.
Excellent. Thank you.